Hello, Sunshine. I'm Alexi Lawless, and welcome to the State of the Union podcast, where we look at the beautiful game on and off the field through the lens of red, white, and blue-colored glasses. This week, we'll be talking, U.S. men's national team, Gervais, World Cup qualifying, Carlin, Canadian revolt, Messi fire, Ronaldo return fire, transfer window news, Neymar mockery, Macario, other stuff. So much other stuff and so much more. But first, joining me, as always, is my friend, my colleague, my guiding light, David Mosse, a soccer savant and a Fox Soccer researcher and writer extraordinaire. Mosse, how are you doing on this? What are we looking at here? Monday, June 6th.
Doing well. We were just together for several hours and now we're apart.
We are recording this, as you can hear, remotely. Apologies if they are necessary. I don't necessarily think they are. Hopefully you can hear us clearly and you will forgive us. We are in the midst. We are knee deep in Nations League coverage, which means that we are in it each and every day doing a game, and there's other games going on at the same time. But it cuts right into the moment in Mondays where we usually are able to record at the studios in Los Angeles, and so we have to come home, and we just do it this way. So this will happen for the next few weeks. But it's good to see you anyway. I saw you earlier for our production meeting, and then you were in my ear as we continued on with our coverage today of Nations League, which you can continue to find all week on Fox and next week. So all sorts of stuff going on here. Mosse, did you see anything? We did the special pod midweek last week, not emergency pod, but just a special mini pod that people got. So when it comes to the U.S. national team, but since last we spoke, some episodes have come out. Some shows maybe have come to an end. What did you watch this week?
Well, as promised, I've already banged through all 6 episodes of We Own This City, and I've started on Severance. I'm 3 episodes into that.
Okay. So now that We Own This City is done and dusted, overall thoughts?
Well, it's interesting we're having this conversation because last week was the 20-year anniversary of the first episode of The Wire airing. And so there were all sorts of tributes. Alan Sepinwall wrote a great article in Rolling Stone saying that it's the greatest TV drama ever and has yet to be duplicated.
I saw that. Yeah, it was all over the place. Social media, everybody. Yeah. So I didn't realize at the time how much it was resonating, but it permeated through for a lot of people. I wasn't watching it, but man, oh man, people are real protective and adamant about how good that was.
Yeah, and it's my favorite TV drama of all time. And I know there's an inevitable compare and contrast with We Own the City, but I do think it's very difficult to compare a 6-episode miniseries to a 5-season show. Obviously, The Wire was much more fully realized. The characters were more developed, 3-dimensional, all sorts of different stories, while We Own the City just zeroed in on this one true story that occurred several years back in Baltimore. And listen, I found it compelling. I thought it recounted the story in a compelling way. But yeah, I mean, the characters aren't all that developed. So you're just sort of finding out what happened. And then it sent me down a Wikipedia rabbit hole of reading about the case and these different people, Wayne Jenkins and Herschel. I don't think it's like an all-time great TV show, but for those 6 hours, it kept me interested.
Yeah, but I think you're letting him off the hook a little bit. As I said before, I thought that the writing wasn't up to snuff, and I didn't think the acting was up to snuff. And just because it's only 6 episodes, just because you have a long character arc, that shouldn't necessarily mean that the writing shouldn't be up to snuff or the acting shouldn't be up to snuff. So I was disappointed. And yes, as we know, I went back and watched The Wire, and yes, there was inevitable comparison. And while it's not necessarily designed to be an equivalent or a companion piece to it, you're still. I still think that you can do something special. You're never going to live up to The Wire. I get that. That's not what I was asking it to do, but I don't even think it came even remotely close. Even if you hadn't seen The Wire and you just watched it in and of itself, I don't think that it would live up to it. So no, I don't rate it.
It was jarring to see Jamie Hector, the guy who played Marlowe in The Wire, be the good guy here as Sean Suter, the cop who tragically, should I ruin it for people, took his own life, we think. because from what I read, there's some question about that still. What exactly happened there with Sean Suter? But yeah, no, I disagree a little bit. I thought it was well done. I enjoyed it, so I would give it high marks. But certainly, The Wire remains unchallenged in my pecking order of TV dramas. And then I'm off and running on Severance, which is almost like Squid Game level trippy, but I have to say, in a good way, I'm definitely hooked. I can't wait I'll probably fire up another episode or two tonight. So I'm enjoying it so far. 3 episodes in, I think it's 9. So off and running on that.
All right. 2 things for me. I watched the new special on Netflix from Ricky Gervais. I think it's called Supernatural. And I loved it. I think that this will dovetail into the next thing that I'm talking about here. I think that in a day and age where, there are very few dangerous type of comedians, let alone performers or entertainers. I think that he is one of them. And let's be honest, we live in interesting and or dangerous times, especially when you talk about things. And I thought that he did what I want comedians to do and push the envelope, but push the envelope for laughs, and recognize that first and foremost, as a comedian out there and as a mirror to the world, if you will, you're there to make people laugh. And I thought it was so funny. And I thought it was well done. I thought it was well written. I thought it was witty. I thought it was timely. The inevitable cancellation process that happens, I'm sure is underway right now, but that was kind of the point ultimately in what you talked about. So I thought that was really, really good. And then I watched the George Carlin documentary, and I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Truth be told, I was never a George Carlin fan. I never got it. I never understood. Not that I didn't respect, but in what I was talking about with Ricky Gervais there, I never thought it was that funny. Was it interesting and intellectually stimulating? Yeah. But I thought it lacked the real laugh out loud type of comedy. And I'm sure if George Carlin were alive today, said, well, that wasn't always the point. Well, for me, it is the point. In the same way, I didn't really get into the documentary. I can watch documentaries of people that I didn't necessarily care about or even know about and be really, really interested in them, aside from their actual, if they're performers or something, what they actually did. You can still make a documentary interesting. It just didn't happen for me. I don't know. And maybe I come at it because I'm not a huge George Carlin fan, but that shouldn't preclude me from enjoying a documentary about what is undoubtedly an incredibly interesting man who lived an incredible and interesting life. So,
well, who strongly disagrees with you?
Who's that?
Our good friend Jason Wormser, because he emailed me about it and we've been discussing it. Yeah, he loved it.
What the hell does he know? All right. Anything else, Mosse?
That's it.
All right. You ready to light this candle?
Let's do it.
All right. We got plenty of soccer as we head through the summer months here, including, as I said before, the Nations League that we're going to talk about later on the show. We're going to start it off with the national team, the U.S. Men's National League, that continues on. Look, Mosse, we were counting up the days and the games that teams are going to have together before the World Cup. And while this is a unique aspect of 2022, having a World Cup in November and December, it's just few and far between. And so obviously from a coaching perspective, the time that you have with these teams is valuable, but the actual 90 minutes that we see, fair or not, right or not, we are judging these players and these teams. And from a U.S. perspective, as they get ready to go into some Nations League games against El Salvador and Grenada that aren't going to tell us anything. These 2 games against Morocco, that we talked about last week, and then against Uruguay, this past game, this is where it's final chance for some of these players, I think, to really impress. But in general, we're also assessing what this team is on Monday, June 6, 2022. I don't think that minds were necessarily changed or blown by the Uruguay game, but this was a higher level of competition. And I think that the U.S. came out of it relatively unscathed, but like I said, nobody's mind was blown, and we weren't blown away, I think, by any individual or by the collective play. Now, there were plenty of changes when it comes to the lineup. We saw the return of Weston McKennie in a starting position, and that McKennie, Adams, Mosse trio in the midfield that I think, unless something happens, is going to be the trio in that midfield. We did see Joe Scally, who so many had called for and had to have him. I thought he struggled. I didn't think that he was particularly good. And is it fair? Look, life isn't fair and soccer isn't fair. Okay, so that he's not necessarily playing his preferred position, or it's only one game, fine, but you only have a certain amount of time to impress Greg Berhalter, and it's very, very limited. And every single one of us at a certain point has been given a window of opportunity, and some very, very good players haven't been able to take it, that have gone on to be good players. But this is what the situation is right now. And so I'm not picking on Joe Scally. It's just, he was one of those players that I think people were curious to see ultimately what he would look like, especially since he's a player in the Bundesliga right now. But he's much more, I think, for the future, maybe for 2026 when we're talking about players out there. And then we saw Sean Johnson play in goal. So a lot of different things to talk about. We can get into the details here, but in general, 0-0 for those that maybe didn't watch. It ended 0-0. It could have been a U.S. win, given the chances they had, or it could have been a Uruguay win in terms of the chances that they had. But in general, what were your thoughts on the game?
Yeah, the word I would use is useful. Thought it was a entertaining game, fairly even. Uruguay probably just shaded it in terms of chances. U.S. did some good things. They did some bad things, but a very solid test. I think a lot of relevant data points that Greg Berhalter can take out of this.
What did you think of? Let's go from back to front. And I said after the game on Fox, I said that this, and it's not just this game, but in general, if we were to show up in the World Cup in November and December in Qatar, and the U.S. had to start Sean Johnson, okay, for whatever reason, and by the way, it could very well happen if Greg Berhalter is to be believed, because he made a point both publicly and privately of saying that for him, it's about playing. It's about playing at your club, and then obviously playing well at your club. And that puts him in an interesting position, because the two 1 and 1A types of goalkeepers in Zach Steffen and Matt Turner, unless something changes, and which could change, probably for the foreseeable future and come the World Cup, are going to be the number 2s for their teams, Arsenal for Matt and Man City for Zach Steffen. And if they're not playing, if Greg Berhalter is to be believed, then Sean Johnson, who I got a pretty good feeling he's going to be starting and playing for the rest of the year, unless, knock on wood, something happens to him from a physical perspective. If he is playing for NYCFC, that's going to be one of the top teams and playing well, then is he the starter? Anyway, I don't think that that's necessarily going to happen, because I get why Greg has to say those things. But I mean, Christian Pulisic, for example, it's not as if he's starting every single game for Chelsea, but you're not going to start Christian Pulisic. And I asked Greg Berhalter this, and he was very honest. He said, well, things can change, and absolutely. And so it's not out of the realm of possibility. And I have to believe that Greg Berhalter in his core does believe what he's saying, but it's easy to say. It's another thing to do it when you get down to brass tacks and when you get down to the World Cup, which ultimately, no matter what Greg Berhalter does, that's where he's going to be judged. Sean Johnson, what'd you think in the game? And more importantly, do you think that he is the number 3? And would you have a problem if he was the starter come November?
Well, first off, I thought he played well. He made that one incredible save on Darwin Nunez in the second half. So nothing wrong from his standpoint. But no, I think Berhalter's words, he has to say that, but it was a bit of a stretch. I'd be stunned if when the U.S. takes the field against Wales, we'll get to that in a second, on November 21st, if it's not Turner or Steffen in goal, regardless of their playing time at club level. I think he's hitched his wagon to those two, and he's not going to change at this point. But I think there is a legit battle for that number 3, and Johnson certainly helped himself. He's in that competition with Ethan Horvath and maybe a couple of others, and so I do think he boosted his stock in that regard.
All right, let's move to the back 4. We saw again the pairing from the start of Aaron Long and Walker Zimmerman. And why is this important? Well, with Miles Robinson out, and look, it's Achilles, and I've even heard somebody say, hey, you never know. No, I think we know, and we have to believe, and unfortunately, that's not going to happen. It's just horrible timing, and it's a huge loss. But who is going to pair him? I think that it's going to be Aaron Long right now. Chris Richards might have a say right now, but I think right now, the way things are going, I think that Greg Berhalter trusts Aaron Long. And keep in mind that Aaron Long, before his Achilles injury, was what Walker Zimmerman once, or what Walker Zimmerman is now, I guess. So it's not completely out of left field to have Aaron Long starting for the national team and starting for Greg Berhalter. Is it the best pairing I've ever seen? No. Does it make me nervous at times? Yes. I think that they can be had for speed, and they can make some interesting decisions, but I don't see a better one now, and I'm not sure that one is going to emerge going forward. What do you think of the pairing there?
Well, first off, an overall point, it's interesting coming out of a 0-0 game that I feel better about the U.S. attack than I do the defense. I think there's more question marks back there. And yeah, I thought Long played okay in these two games, but not well enough to cement that spot alongside Zimmerman. The player I'm intrigued by is Chris Richards. I think he checks a lot of the boxes that Berhalter likes. And so wasn't able to play in this window, but I still think it's probably between those two, but I still think there is a battle there between Richards and Long for that other center back spot alongside Zimmerman.
Agreed. I mentioned the three in the middle that I don't think is going to change, although there certainly is debate. And look, we'll talk about this in a little bit. There is plenty of debate to be had, and that's a good thing. These are the champagne problems that Greg Berhalter has, and trying to fit all of this talent and depth into 11 places is not easy. And this is not something that we have always had when it comes to the national team. Do you think anything's changing in that three in the middle?
Can we stay in the back four for 1 second?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Just on Scally, I feel a little bit bad for the kid because he's gotten caught up in this pissing match between Euro snobs and MLS folk on Twitter. And, it's sort of distorted the way we judge his performance. I do think the Euro snobs oversold him, but really we should be looking at Joe Scally as one for 2026. He's a 19-year-old. It was his first start. So, instead he comes in late in the cycle and we're looking at him as potentially being some late cycle impact player that's going to enter the fray. And I think that was a bit of a stretch. So I don't think he played well in these two games. I know I criticized his performance after the Morocco game, and I also don't think he played well against Uruguay, but I don't think we should come down that hard on the kid and take out our frustrations that we really feel on the people on Twitter that were just pushing him so hard for all these months. It's not really his fault.
All right, hold on. A couple of things. I do agree, except you can't have it both ways. You can't have all of these opportunities and resources that haven't existed in the past. You can't have an entire infrastructure that has been created in order to help establish and create and foster better talent. And then when that talent comes to fruition at a younger age, which was, by the way, the aim and the goal all along, have kid gloves and say, you're going to hurt him. You're not going to, he's 19 years old. Yes, he's going to get better. And to your point, yes, I absolutely believe that he could possibly be someone for the future. But I think it also points out that as we continue to grow and as the times change and the perspective that, to be quite honest with you, Europe has on American players starts to change, there will be more and more opportunities. And as that happens, then we have to come to grips with the fact there will be more and more times where a player is playing in Europe, playing well in Europe, but that does not necessarily mean that that player should be involved with the national team or is right for the national team. And it doesn't mean that they're not great. And as you know, I come from a generation where if you got to Europe, that already was an accomplishment. At some point, we are going to have to make that transition as a soccer playing nation and as a community, a soccer community, that just getting to Europe is not necessarily that big a deal. From a money perspective, I get all that. But getting to Europe and actually fitting into what the national team, in this case, it would be Greg Berhalter, wants, those are two different things. And so I agree that maybe those out there that view as soon as you land on the tarmac at Charles de Gaulle or any place else out there that automatically you change as a player, I get that, but we're going to have to. There are going to be more of these, Mosse, as we go on, especially in this day and age where you can't hide. All right, everybody knows about these players out there, and if there is a player with an American passport that does something well while standing with 2 feet on European soil, automatically there seems to be a whether it's a Twitter fan base or a Reddit group or something that crops up and says, well, this is the next best thing. And this is the savior out there. All right. Midfield 3, anything that you think is going to change?
Well, Mosse's performance has been somewhat polarizing. I think we all agree the ball progression is excellent, but the decision-making when it comes time to release the ball is a bit hit or miss. I know Ali Wagner had a lot of issues with that aspect of his play. What do you think? Do you think the criticism is fair? Or
I do think it's fair. I mean, when he does those moments of penetration, I mean, they're beautiful because they cut out any tactical type of plan that a team has. And when you bypass those, when you just basically bore a hole right through those lines that have been put there from a tactical perspective, you blow up what's going on. But to Ali's point, and she's absolutely correct, that final pass, and that's something that final pass, it's really that final decision when he cuts through and is in the clear and in that clearing, then things are going to have to slow down for him. And yes, he's still young, and yes, he's still getting better. But I will take the good with the bad when it comes to what he is doing. And I will also take the coordination and I think the understanding between those three. And keep in mind, Weston McKennie is still rusty and he's still coming back. So we didn't get the best of Weston McKennie there. But the fact that these players have played together now for many, many games, I think they understand what each other is good at and what each other isn't good at. I think that there is a value to that. And from a Mosse perspective, I think he's only going to get better. And so, yeah, I do. But when I was, and I'll talk about my 11 a little later on, but absolutely, and there's plenty of people out there that when they are looking for that one player that, while it hurts, they have to take out, there are plenty of people that are looking at Mosse.
Now, I'm starting to see a lot of projected lineups. U.S. fans want to try to fit as many of their favorite players as they can into a team. And a lot of lineups that have McKennie, Adams, and Reyna as that third midfielder playing in more of a number 10 position. But I'd be careful about any lineup that limits Weston McKennie's ability to bomb forward. I mean, if you're playing Reyna as the 10 and then 3 other guys up top, presumably Pulisic, some combination of Pulisic, Aronson, Timothy Weah, or Jesus Ferreira, boy, you're really limiting. At that point, then McKennie ends up having to sit deeper most of the game and function as more of a deep-lying playmaker. Otherwise, if he bombs forward, you'd leave Adams all alone in the midfield in transition situations. And so you need to think about, if we think Adams and McKennie are locks, that third guy in the midfield has to be somebody that is capable of dropping back deep sometimes and giving Weston the ability to bomb forward and take advantage of his box-to-box abilities. Yeah,
as we get going here and we start talking about potential or best 11s that we have here, the Reyna, I mean, how do you solve a problem like Reyna? And it's a good problem to solve, but how do we solve it? Because, when I ask people on Twitter if they agree with me or not, inevitably they say, no, you're crazy. You shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do this. But none of them want to actually say, all right, but how are you getting Reyna on the field? Who are you taking off? And again, these are good problems to have. And we're also dealing with an ideal, because someone said, what about a healthy Gio Reyna? Well, when was the last time you saw a healthy Gio Reyna? And so we're almost factoring in, unfortunately, because of his history, that he's going to get hurt or there's going to be a problem. Knock on wood. I hope if he's going to be healthy, I hope it's for the World Cup.
It is worth noting that Aronson came on for McKennie at the half. So Berhalter does seem intent on seeing if Aronson can function in that midfield 3. So that was kind of interesting.
All right. Up top, we continued on with the Pulisic, Jesus Ferreira, and Timothy Weah trident, whatever we want to call it up there. And we have seen this in the past. He went to the Jesus Ferreira well again, which isn't necessarily a surprise. I think he wants to give him the benefit of the doubt. He is the in-form number 9, even though he's not a number 9, and he'd be the first to admit that he plays it in a very different way than a traditional number 9, so your false 9 or anything like that. Again, he didn't score, had some opportunities. Even though my 11 that I ultimately came out with did not have Jesus Ferreira. I do feel that he actually does bring value. And I think that some of the things that he does enable some of those other players to do it. And it's a thankless job. You are going to bring attention to yourself because you're going to play the position in such a unique way. So, yeah, I mean, I feel a little bit bad for Jesus Ferreira, but in my 11, I think he is one of the, I think he's one of them, the guys that gets left out.
I was debating this with people. That header in the first half that went over the bar, I thought that was more Yedlin's fault. That was a terrible cross behind him, hit too hard. If Yedlin had squared it across properly, then that's a goal. How much of blame do you put on Jesus Ferreira on that play that maybe a more traditional center forward would have? No,
scored? I will say, and look, all strikers, regardless if they're false nines or not, and if Eric Ronaldo was here, he'd tell you the same thing, is they all play on that line. I get it. And you're going to be offside. You look at Cristiano Ronaldo, they're often offside a lot. But it was interesting to see, even though it wasn't called all the time, how many times when that final cross was coming, and a lot of times it was coming from Weah and that right-hand side, how oftentimes had the ball gotten through, he would have been called offside. So understanding that line, I mean, and he's not that poacher. He's not that guy in the box, but you still have to understand fundamentally if and when those situations come, how you need to be there. And obviously you need to be on side. Thoughts on the top three up there? And you just mentioned Jesus for a little bit.
Yeah, it would have been nice given his goal scoring form in MLS if he could have carried that over in these two friendlies. He didn't. So I think in Berhalter's mind, there is a trade-off there. He does some good false nine-ish stuff, but Berhalter may still feel that at the international level, you're sacrificing goals if you play Jesus Ferreira up there. Now, Timothy Weah, I thought was excellent in this game. Yep. It was actually a big drop-off when Areola came on for him. And a lot of people seem to think that Weah has reached that level of has to be on the field. When you sit down to figure out a lineup, is he a guy that you have that mindset too? You mentioned that with Aronson. Is sure. Timothy Weah on that level too?
Yeah. So let's do it then. Shall we do it? And I'll give you my 11. If you didn't see it on air, I'll give it to you right now. And I'll tell you what, I went back and forth, Mosse. I was going back and forth with you, and I was asking for help at different times from different people because it was painful. It was stressful because I knew that there were players that I was going to have to leave out. A lot of this stemmed from the fact that I have come around on Brenden Aaronson, as I said last week, and I need him on the field. And he has charmed me. He has wooed me to the extent that I think he is in my starting. No, I don't think he is in my starting 11. So I got Matt Turner in goal. I think that he is a great shot stopper. And I think that he is much better with his feet than people give him credit for, and much better than his feet, to be quite honest, that he gives himself credit for, that he even knows. Dest on the right-hand side, Jedi Robinson on the left-hand side. And then I have Aaron Long and Walker Zimmerman. Although I agree with you that Chris Richards, when all is said and done, might have something to say, but he's got to be there and he's got to show it. And I do think right now, Aaron Long has an edge in that I think he has obviously more experience, and I think he has Greg Berhalter's confidence more so, a smidge more than Richards. But that certainly could change before the World Cup. Same three as we talked about with Musa, Adams, and McKinney, and then up top, and this is where it gets interesting. I am going to have. And I'm not going to tell you where they are for a reason, but it's going to be Christian Pulisic, it's going to be Brenden Aaronson, and it's going to be Tim Weah. And, you can put Christian on the left, and you can put Brenden Aaronson on the right, and you can put Tim Weah in the middle. Now, you would say, okay, there's that a false nine type of thing. Here's the deal. We do not have a nine, okay? And certainly not in the way that makes me comfortable and confident in saying this is the guy that's going to score our goals. This is the guy that's going to hold the ball up. And this is a guy that has to be in the middle there. So we've seen the false nine with Jesus Ferreira, who, while I think at times he does, like I said, do good things, it's not enough of a false nine that I'm willing to sacrifice one of those 11 positions for. So in an attempt to kind of get as many good soccer players on the field as possible. And believe me, this is not the way I necessarily want a team to be set up, but this is just the reality of in June in 2022 of what this team is. We just haven't found a number 9. So I'm going to get the best soccer players on the field that I possibly can. As I said, Aronson, Weah, and Pulisic. Now, where they show up in the tactical that we put out before the game doesn't really matter. They can go wherever they want. It is rather than a false nine, it is a false front, and it is complete organized chaos in that they are able and willing to go wherever they want. We saw Christian Pulisic in this series of games make that inside or outside to inside run. I like Christian Pulisic out wide, and I like Weah out wide, and I think that's where they'll do a lot of their damage, but it doesn't preclude them from coming inside, and it doesn't preclude Aronson from going outside. But in order to do that, obviously, Jesus Ferreira, out. Zach Steffen in goal, out. As we mentioned, when it comes to, people talk about Luca De La Torre and these types of players. So those guys are out. And then obviously up top, the big one and the big elephant in the room is Gio Reyna, who for me is not in my starting 11. And it pains me. It pains me. I don't know if Greg Berhalter is the same, thinks the same way. But when I say that, people say, oh, can you not have Gio Reyna? So fine. You have to take Gio Reyna and now put him in and take somebody out. Mosse, what do you think of my 11 there, and what would you change, if anything?
No, I like it. My question would be, if Gio Reyna can get himself healthy and plays incredibly well the next few months to the point where you feel like you need to put him back in, who would be the guy to drop out?
That's what I'm asking you. I preface this by saying that everybody's healthy. Okay, not Miles Robinson or anything like that, but Gio Reyna is healthy. So even a healthy Gio Reyna, this is my 11. So what would you do then? Because you seem to think that if he's healthy and playing, he should be in the 11. So where is he playing, and who are you taking out?
Yeah, then probably Aronson has to come out.
So, but Aronson comes out. That's still a 3 up top. So where is he playing? In the middle? As a false 9, but as a better version of the false 9 relative to Jesus.
Yeah, I whenever I bring that up to people, they look at me crazy. But I think he could play that sort of Phil Foden-ish sort of false 9 role that Foden plays with Manchester City. I don't think it's that crazy. So
it's not that crazy, and I'm not completely averse to that by any stretch of the imagination. And I think I was talking to you, Mosse, where Gio Reyna, for all the good qualities that he has, defending and running through a wall and, doing the dirty work, if you will, that's not something that I associate. Doesn't mean he can't do it. All right. Don't yell at me or anything, but I don't think we're going to get that. And, he's still a young developing player. And I think from the mentality that he has, I think that he will fade out a little bit from games at times. And so I want him to do the least amount of damage if and when that happens. And so maybe to your point, having him up there offers in those moments, and they're going to happen, especially against better teams, maybe offers us the least amount of damage.
And we can debate who would be that quasi false 9, but your larger point is one I agree with. Don't force a traditional center forward who is not really a starting caliber player on this team. Put your 11 best players on the field. I think we're reaching the point here where I think we can conclude that the U.S. doesn't have international caliber traditional center forward. So I agree with your overall basic point that you had in your head when you sat down to make up this team. And
this is, some will see it as a slight against Jesus Ferreira. No, I always considered the Jesus Ferreira experiment. By the way, I think it has been successful relatively, but I always considered it as a plan B. I always considered it as something that we could go to at a certain point within a game or against a certain opponent to throw something different. But I never looked at it in terms of this being the way that we wanted to play. And certainly if we're going to have a false 9, whoever that false 9 is, I just don't think that Ferreira is there yet. Maybe he will be, come the World Cup. All right. Anything else, Mosse, you wanted to mention about this?
A couple of miscellaneous things about this game. I actually thought the U.S. had a pretty good penalty shout in the 80th minute with Coates. I know Stu didn't think so. And listen, the handball rule now, who the heck knows? But I don't know. I felt like the hand was pretty stretched out there and impeded the cross from going towards the box.
There was no VAR in these games. And had there been, there would have been a lot of different things that would have been. In this day and age, if you're a defender and if you are defending, I've said time and time again, you have to adjust, you have to adapt or risk going extinct. So if you're defending and you're not putting your arms behind your back, I don't think you're defending correctly. And if you go to ground, you better be damn sure where your limbs are when you're going to ground, because we've seen time and time again, even though, if you look at the laws and the way that the laws are written about natural positions and using your arms in a natural way when you do go to ground, I mean, the fact is that if you go to ground and you block a cross that could go through to somebody else, 9 times out of 10, either in the moment or in VAR, they're going to give that. And so, yeah, I completely agree with you that had VAR been in these games, that it might have been a very different type of outcome.
And then one note on Uruguay, it's nice to see Diego Rossi start to get some opportunities there. And who knows, he might be in the World Cup squad. Now, I will say some people were trying to frame this as the first half, it was the U.S. starters against Uruguay backups. The second half, Uruguay starters against the U.S. backups. And there are some issues even on the U.S. side with that framing, but particularly with Uruguay. At no point in that game that they have their full strength team. It always felt mishmashy to me. Obviously, when they bring on Cavani and Valverde, the team that ended the game had a bit more gloss than the one that started it. But still, Suarez and Bentancur weren't even in the squad. Araujo didn't play. Lucas Torreira didn't play. Jimenez came off in the first half. Godin came off at halftime. So it wasn't like I looked at that team in the second half and said, oh, wow, Uruguay is throwing their best at the U.S. So I think some people need to be careful with that construct. But no, I mean, mainly I just wanted to say the Rossi thing. It was nice to see him out there. He had that one nice run into the box, and then his shot got blocked. So, but he's getting some opportunities now. And,
timing is everything. And obviously a new coach comes in and it's amazing because you can be completely out in the cold. And then next thing you know, you're back in.
A new coach, Diego Alonso, who coached Inter Miami in 2020, a season in which Rossi was the Golden Boot winner.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. So, I mean, don't think for a second it's all just about talent. It's about the relationships that you have, that you've built. It's about personal preference. It's all that kind of stuff. All right. Anything else on the U.S. friendlies? Coming up, we have U.S. versus Grenada and El Salvador, right?
Is it Grenada or Granada? I've been wrestling with that the past few days.
I always thought that it was Grenada, but the way it's spelled, it's Granada, right?
Because there's a La Liga team that's Granada, and we've talked about both in the same pod sometimes, and I have to remember which is which.
All right. Well, we're going to get on this, and I have the microphone. So whatever we say on television is going to be right. So we'll have it right by the time these games come about. We'll get back to you folks on this one. We will make an executive and ultimate decision as to how the pronunciation should be.
Well, so
go ahead.
Before the U.S. played Uruguay earlier on Sunday, we found out who the U.S.'s first opponent will be at the World Cup. It will be Wales. They defeated Ukraine 1-0 in the qualifying playoff. Yarmolenko with an own goal on a cross by Gareth Bale. Obviously, the big topic among U.S. fans was which one of these two teams would you rather face? And certainly, I think most people even going into the game felt a certain way. And it was even more pronounced after watching the game that you'd rather face Wales because Ukraine was clearly the better team. They were very unlucky here. This was very much a smash and grab on Wales' part. And watching all the games in this playoff bracket, I came away thinking that Ukraine clearly had the most talent to be dealing with what they dealt with the last few months and then play as well as they did is a credit to them. They played Scotland off the park in that game that they won 3-1, and they were the much better team here, dominated large portions of the game, but Wales get the result. So it's going to be US-Wales, November 21st. Your thoughts?
I think that the soccer gods gave the U.S. a gift here. To your point, of the three teams, far and away the best team is and was Ukraine. And as I've said time and time again, the World Cup is hard enough. I don't want the added challenge of facing, the world's favorite, and the sentimental favorite of the world given the situation. And so while, the human part of me and the emotional part of me feels for Ukraine and the story that it could have been and almost was, given the backdrop of what that country is going through, the competitive side of me and the competitive part of me recognizes that look, you need as much help as you possibly can, especially if you're from the U.S. Now, if you're Wales, or Iran or anybody else, you're probably looking at it in the same way. And so we come to this group now that has England, Iran, United States, and Wales, and all three teams, other than England, I think, look at it as this is good. England, I think, looks at it as a breeze. And if you listen to the English media, and never put it past them to, like I said before, over exaggerate or celebrate something before it's won. This is England's to lose relative to these other three teams. But having said that, the U.S. gets to play in the first game of the World Cup, November 21st, against Wales. And you said it, you saw Wales. The U.S. in that game, I think, will be considered the favorite, and I think rightly and fairly so. The U.S. should expect 3 points. And if you come out of the chute and get 3 points right off the bat, that's a good look, and you're cruising. And so I'm very, very happy from a competitive perspective that it is Wales rather than Ukraine. It's not that Wales can't beat the U.S. and it's not disrespectful to them. It's just the reality and what I have seen with my own eyes.
I agree, but the only thing I'll say, just to play devil's advocate, is that with Ukraine or Scotland, you would not have had to face a great player that can win a game by himself. Wales do have that in Gareth Bale. So that's a little bit scary. I could see a scenario where the U.S. outplays Wales for 90 minutes, doesn't take their chances, maybe scores one goal, and then Gareth Bale has one moment each half, and you look up and it's 2-1 Wales, 2 goals by Gareth Bale, and you wonder, how on earth did the U.S. lose this game? Could you not see that happening on November 21st?
Bale, I say Bale because my wife over the last week would come in and say, is Christian Bale playing today? And I kept saying, stop doing that, because then I'm going to do that on air. And she knows she's just messing with me, which is what she does. I am not scared of Gareth Bale. Is he a good player? Yes. Is he potentially a great player? Yes. I mean, what he has done, or more importantly, I guess what he hasn't done over the last few years is mind-boggling. But from an international perspective, he turns it on. Having said that, I mean, he was a non-factor in the game other than hitting the free kick, right? Which, by the way, was an own goal. All right. And even had it gone through, the goalkeeper could have trapped it off his chest. So it's not as if it was this incredible shot. And I'm not saying he can't pull magic out. Okay. And I'm also not saying the U.S. doesn't have to be aware of him. But I have no problem playing against Wales with Bale.
It is funny. We're going to talk about the transfer market later on. Most every player that's contemplating a move this summer, a big point of emphasis is going somewhere where you're going to play regularly so you can stay sharp for the World Cup. Bale is almost the one player that's the opposite. He wants to go somewhere where the less he plays, the better, because he's somehow cultivated this thing where he doesn't have to play at club level. He just rests his body, and he's somehow immune to rust. Every few months he can show up for Wales and just flip the switch and play well. Granted, he didn't play that well in this game, but he played very well in the semifinal playoff against Austria. And so it's a weird scenario. Where is he going to go play the next few months? Because I don't think he wants that heavy of a load at club level. He's just sort of accepted at this point that he's an international player. So it's kind of a funny dynamic. I
can't wait for the World Cup, and I can't wait for that first whistle. I want Greg Berhalter to send a team out. I mean, it's going to be one of the youngest, probably the youngest team at the World Cup ultimately when they step on the field. And I want them to come right out of the chute against Wales, and Wales not know what hit them with these young guys running all over the place and running all over them. So, but I'm talking about it as if it's a fait accompli, and that's not the case at all. It's a World Cup for a reason. And these teams are there for a reason. And this is going to be a really interesting matchup. This is going to be a really interesting group, but it is there. It is there for the taking when it comes to the U.S. to find a pathway out of the group. And it goes without saying, 3 points, a win in your first game on November 21st in the World Cup would be very, very nice. Anything else, Mosse?
Yeah, we should spend a minute on the US's CONCACAF rivals, Canada, who once upon a time were the feel-good story, qualifying to their first World Cup since 1986, but extraordinary developments there because they had a friendly scheduled against Panama, warm-up game for the World Cup. The players have been embroiled in this dispute with the federation over money and other issues. They refused to train ahead of this game, and then they refused to play in the friendly. So the friendly had to be canceled. The fans who showed up were turned away. And the players released a statement outlining everything they want. They want a change in leadership atop the federation. They also want 40% of the FIFA prize money to go to them. They want better accommodations for their families at the World Cup. And also, they made a big point of saying they want a structure that allows for equitable pay with the women. They want the women to get the same percentage of World Cup money that they get. But an extra layer was added to the story when the Canadian women put out their own statement and said, we're not looking for equitable pay. We're looking for equal pay, which speaks to the agreement the U.S. just signed, kind of reverberating around the world. And so that was sort of the women saying, don't try to use us to make yourselves, to score PR points in this battle because you're not fighting for the same thing that we're fighting for. So that all was very interesting. So what do you make of this crazy situation?
Well, obviously, the Canadian men's national team felt that it was justified and appropriate to behave like this and to take these actions. And obviously, they are in an advantageous position, already qualified for the World Cup. As you mentioned, an incredible feel-good story in terms of this generation and the return after the last time being 1986. And they felt that this was going to send the message, whatever that message ultimately is. They also recognized that, like I said, they have incredible leverage at this moment. They also said, what's going to make the biggest splash? Because, as you said, this was a game that was rescheduled. Originally, they had been scheduled to play against Iran, which would have been nice to see from a U.S. perspective. And then, politics got involved and, people were not happy about that and it got canceled. And Panama was the last second stand-in and came and said, all right, well, we'll play this game because, as we said at the top of the show, there's only a few windows left. So especially for a team like Canada, finally returning to the World Cup, you can't afford to be wasting these opportunities. I thought it was a little crappy from the Canadian men's team to do this on the day that the game was happening. And therefore Panama had to, flew up to Vancouver, was ready to play a game. And then they dropped this on them. But let's be honest, that was one of the reasons why it made news. And they knew exactly what they're doing. I'm talking about the Canadian men's national team. There are people out there, and you can find them that are in the weeds about this in a good way and have all of the details that if you want to get into it. Just like the U.S. women's national team, when the lawsuits came about in the last couple of years, this is about money. And this is a situation and a problem, if you feel it's a problem, that is solved with money. There are folks out there that will look from the outside and say, how dare they do this? And there are folks out there that look from the outside and say, well done, we're 100% behind you. Okay, fine. I think everybody, whether you're a Canadian fan or not, wants to see this incredible Canadian team play in the World Cup. They also, I think everybody agrees that if you're going to be compensated for the national team, and we have come to the conclusion that that's what's going to happen for national teams, certainly for the U.S. and the Canadian national team, that you would want them to be compensated fairly and justly. The women's part of it and the Canadian women's national team, which we know is, one of the best in the world and has been over the years. I applaud them coming out and being clear about what the difference is. And that was a big deal when it came to the U.S. men's and women's historic contract that they had, or deal and agreement that they had. To your point, it's not about, the percentages. It's about actually getting equal pay on both sides. And that's a difference. And that's a difference, by the way, that oftentimes has been lost over the years when this has been done, because it's been done by other national teams out there. And I think that that's important. I hope that this gets sorted out. Like I said, there's those that want to spend plenty of time digging into this and love this kind of stuff. I just want to see Canada. I just want to see Canada play, and I hope that they get paid whatever it is ultimately that they want, and that they do well in what I think is a pretty difficult group, to be quite honest. As a reminder, Canada is in Group F with Belgium, Morocco, and Croatia. And as good as Canada is, and I think that they are good, I think it's going to be difficult for them to come out of the group. And, they want to get this sorted out as quickly as possible. The interesting thing is that they canceled a friendly, and that's all fine and well. It's not fine and well, but that's one thing. It's different when you're actually playing a tournament and a FIFA sanctioned tournament when it comes to, and CONCACAF when it comes to the Nations League, which is what is upon us right now. So they kind of have to figure this out relatively quickly and get to a point where there is an agreement going forward. And I hope that they do with Nations League. And I don't know who they're playing, but they have the Nations League coming up like the US does too.
We've seen this kind of stuff cut both ways. It can have a galvanizing effect. An example of that being the US in the 95 Copa America, which you can speak to very well. Yep. And then we've also seen it derail a team. Like the US benefited in 2014 from Ghana having this major dispute with their federation. They even threatened to boycott one of their World Cup matches. They ended up playing it, but some players sat out. And long story short, they didn't get the result, and the US was able to advance to round of 16.
I will say what's important. I think that is going to come out of this is much more transparency and understanding about the finances when it comes to the Canadian Soccer Federation. And I actually think that they did a pretty good job, and they're always going to be painted as the villain. That's just the way that it goes. But I actually think they did a pretty good job of coming out and being pretty adamant about this is what we feel has happened and this is what we feel is appropriate, and then playing that card. And it's a fair card to play about how any federation, well, not any federation, but certainly federations that we're talking about here, are so much more than just their men's national team or their women's national team. And talking about, the way that pie is split up and all of the different things that money goes to and helps to sustain. And by the way, a culture that is not even close to where the US soccer culture is. And, so the need for money and the justification for why they are giving whatever amount of the pie out there needs to be explained. And if and when we see why they're doing this or not doing this relative to everything that goes on within a federation, I think that type of clarity is important. And the representatives for Canada, they got out in front of it and they talked about the things very publicly and said, these are the things that we have to budget for. These are the things that we have going on now. These are the things that we have in the future. And whether it's national teams, whether it's youth national teams, whether it's coaching, whether it's referees, all of those different things. Oh, and by the way, a World Cup in 2026 coming, and a very, very young, and in essence, fragile Canadian professional league that's going on, and potentially women's professional league going forward. All of those different things, rely, like anything else, on funding and resources and money. And so it'll be really interesting ultimately to see how that pie is split up, and ultimately how much money the men's team gets and the women's teams get. So hopefully that gets done quickly, because like I said, ultimately this is a really good Canada team, and I really want to see what they look like in the World Cup. And I don't want them to be, to be hurt by not training together, because they also took off trainings. And obviously not by not playing the games. And we've said time and time again how few opportunities they are going forward. Anything else, Mosse?
That's it.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll take a trip around Europe and obviously that Nations League that we've been talking about. Don't go anywhere. All right, Mosse, we're back here. Well, let's take a trip around Europe here. And we've been covering this Nations League. And, you did a really good job of explaining what Nations League is and what it isn't. And now it is upon us and we are seeing it. And I don't know about you, but first off, it's been really interesting. It's been really fun to see a lot of these teams. Obviously, we are hyper-focused on the teams that are going to be involved in the World Cup, but there's also plenty of other teams out there that are involved in this. But this strange moment and this strange balance of teams right now that are scheduled to go to the World Cup and therefore have a lot of their focus, I think, understandably so, on the World Cup. And then others that are looking towards Nations League and using it to build for Euros, or just building to get better when it comes to the teams. Initial impressions of the Nations League. Now, keep in mind, this was designed to give higher quality competition more often when it comes to these quote unquote games that in the past were friendlies.
I was going to go to the exact point you just made. First off, we're seeing managers rotate quite a bit because we're coming off a long club season. And also, there's just this larger overarching question about what each team is trying to accomplish here. You know, I generally prefer competitive matches to friendlies, which is why this Nations League concept has been a success. But you wonder, a few months out from a World Cup, the second to last window before a World Cup, you know, is there an argument that you're better off playing friendlies because then there's no ambiguity about what you're trying to accomplish? You know, you look at these games the U.S. just played. We all know they were warm-up games for the World Cup. So Berhalter coached them that way. The players approached them that way. We analyze them that way versus this weird dance that I think, you know, some of these coaches don't know exactly how to approach these Nations League games, where it is a tournament. These are competitive games. They're worth points. If you get knocked out of this competition, you're going to get criticized by the local media. But at the same time, you're trying to get the team ready for the World Cup. And, you know, so if you're down a goal with 10 minutes left, are you reaching to the bench for some proven veteran striker to try to get your result, or some young kid that you want to take a look at because you think he might be useful at the World Cup, and you already know what the proven veteran is going to give you? So it's a weird dance that these coaches have to play. I mean, what are your overall feelings about that?
It is, because let's be honest, a lot of these teams, when it comes to qualifying for the Euros, they know that they're going to qualify, well, for the most part, in the regular process. And yes, there is a possibility and a second bite at the apple, and therefore that carrot given on where you finish. And you explained that last pod. But, you know, if you're Italy right now, which is not going to the World Cup, you're approaching these games very, very differently than, I mean, we did France today, and that was as B as you can possibly get from a France team. Now, it doesn't mean it's not a good team. And by the way, they still got a point away, which kind of shows you the depth that France has. And it goes back to what we talked in the last segment about the limited opportunity that these teams have to be together, and therefore these coaches have. And listen, it's going to be 26 players on the roster ultimately when all is said and done. But it's still within these battles that we see between teams, there are the individual battles where players are vying to be on that plane to Qatar. And then you have other teams that are just trying to be shown and just trying to do well to be part of the national team. So yeah, it's in the theory of it is, you know, I think justified, and I think very, very interesting. How it's playing out in real time, it's hard. And I don't know. I don't think there's necessarily an answer. I just think that this is still better than what we have had in the past. And you got, you know, guys like Kevin De Bruyne saying, well, you know, why are we doing this? Well, I still am interested to see when, you know, a team like Italy is playing in this Nations League, even though they're not going to the World Cup. And I'm absolutely interested, especially when you are going to a World Cup. And look, peek behind the curtain. This is a unique moment in terms of our preparation for the World Cup, to be able to see these teams in competitive games a few months before the World Cup. That's great. That's great for us. And it's great to see teams that maybe we don't see on a consistent basis. And I say us, those of us that are broadcasting, and people that are watching out there. So we are using these games to the extent that we can, but we also recognize, to your point, Mosse, that if today, for example, had been the start of the World Cup, Didier Deschamps would be playing a very, very different 11 against Croatia.
And one more overarching point, Mbappe's comments about Europe being so far ahead of South America are still reverberating. And so the 6 highest ranked European teams in the FIFA rankings, none of them won on match day 1 of the Nations League. And a lot of South Americans made hay out of that. But you could flip that around and say it lends credence to what Mbappe said, because it speaks to how competitive Europe is. And if you look at the teams that those 6 highest ranked countries faced, there were no slouches. But I mean, just to go over some of the results, France lost at home to Denmark, and then they've since played again. As you mentioned, they drew away to Croatia today with a heavily rotated lineup. Belgium got smashed at home by the Netherlands 4-1. England lost 1-0 away to Hungary. Italy, which is actually higher ranked than Germany. So in terms of the top 6 European teams, it's actually Italy that falls into that category. They drew Germany 1-1. Spain drew Portugal 1-1. Spain has since gone on to play again and draw away to Czech Republic. Portugal did hammer Switzerland 4-0. Ronaldo scored 2 goals. But do you think that speaks to some of these top European teams maybe not being the juggernauts we thought they were? Or no, it speaks more to the overall level of competition and the quality of teams that they've been facing?
I do agree with you, or I guess it would be with others when it comes to what Mbappe said, that the level that maybe Mbappe perceives that these European teams are at and have isn't, when it comes to, because really what he's talking about ultimately is the only way we can ever judge it is when we're playing against each other, right? Just because you play in Europe, or just because you are considered a quote unquote elite team in Europe, that does not mean that you can't lose badly, and look bad in an international event, be it a World Cup or anything else like that. So I don't think it's just as simple as he may see it, that Europe and European teams are better. And especially when that whistle blows. And we saw it, earlier with Argentina in the Finalissimo, and I think it will be on display. Now, that's not to say that a European team isn't going to win the World Cup, but that the overall kind of way that he has blanketed all European teams, that's a bit much.
And this was supposed to be in the Ask Alexi segment, but I'm going to move it up here. Argentina followed up their Finalissima win by playing a friendly against Estonia. They won 5-0. Messi scored all 5 goals. And South Americans made a lot of hay out of that. They said, boy, imagine if Messi got to play against countries like these on a regular basis in these qualifying campaigns they have in Europe for the Euros and the World Cup. And that, I think, there's some credence to, because as I've said, European qualifying, it can be unforgiving because you have very little margin for error. Sometimes you lose one game and that knocks you out of a tournament, but it also does allow you to beef up your stats against all these minnows. I mean, ever since they've expanded qualifying for Euros and World Cups and you get to play all these minnows, there's something to that. I mean, Cristiano Ronaldo, his club scoring records are unimpeachable. You could poke a lot of holes into his international numbers. ESPN FC put out a chart today of who are the countries that he scored the most goals against. And man, there's a lot of Luxembourg, Lithuania, Andorra, Faroe Islands. So I do think there's something to that.
Amen. Amen, my friend. You're absolutely spot on when it comes to that. I mean, look, we play this game and we always have about, but what if this team had to qualify in CONCACAF and stuff like that? Well, what if that team had to qualify in CONMEBOL, where, you have 10 teams? We know, that's a consolidated type of quality right there, that yes, you have your top and your bottom, but from top to bottom is very, very different than when you go top to bottom over in Europe, and the best and the best and the worst. Then you add the fact that, 1 minute you're going to play in the Maracanã, and the next minute you're going to La Paz, and these types of things. So I think that argument, 100%, I think is justified. What else, Mosse?
So in terms of trying to decipher these results and how much should we read into some of these big teams losing, I'm a little worried about Belgium. We look at that big 3 of De Bruyne, Lukaku, and Hazard. 2 of those 3 are coming off very poor club seasons in Hazard and Lukaku. I know Courtois didn't play against the Netherlands. It was Mignolet in goal, but he wasn't really at fault in any of the goals. I'm wondering if Belgium is all that they've been cracked up to be, or if perhaps this golden generation missed its window. Do you think there's a chance that Belgium shows up in Qatar and they're not really the contender that some people have built them up to be?
I mean, how long can you be a golden generation? How long does that shine last? Because I do think that it's lost a little bit, not a little bit, a lot of its luster. And whether it's the individual players that we're talking about or just collectively, and keep in mind, this is a Roberto Martinez who is in multiple cycles now, and that in and of itself is a rarity, and it can get stale very, very easily, which is why they kind of churn them and burn them when it comes to coaches, even for a golden generation. But I think look, I think no matter what, he's gone after this World Cup, but certainly he would want to go out on a high. Again, reminder, they're in Group F with Canada, as we mentioned, Morocco, and Croatia. Certainly a winnable group. And the expectation, I think it would be still, even though they are, kind of for that generation longer in the tooth, still would be to win it. I think what was jarring watching Belgium, and as you said, there were some changes, and Courtois not in goal. I mean, that in and of itself can change a game. We all understand that. But the reliance and still the over-reliance of Lukaku up top to break that pressure. And by the way, when he's there, he's incredible. His ability to hold the ball. And I'm sure Chelsea people were looking at it going, damn, that's pretty incredible. And then unfortunately he got hurt. But what his injury gave us a glimpse into is that there is no plan B. And whatever that is, or if there is a plan B, it did not work. They are so heavily reliant on if and when there is a problem coming out of the back to be able to lump it up. And more often than not, he holds the ball in a really, really good way and provides that security blanket. And if that's ultimately what Belgium is. Now, to your point, Kevin De Bruyne, even before Nations League started, talked about how I think he's kind of checked out here for the summer. And so I do think that he will be motivated. Has there ever been a greater fall from grace when it comes to Hazard? I don't know. Can he get that back? Who knows? But I think Belgium will still be up there as one of the lead. I mean, I think they're number 2, would you say, in the world right now in the FIFA rankings? And it's FIFA rankings, so take them with a grain of salt. And I still think that they will be looked at as elite, but this could be the last go around for this golden generation. And I think if they don't do something special, I'm not talking necessarily about winning the World Cup, but really doing something special and delighting us, then I think looking back on that generation, it will be viewed as a failure ultimately with all of the expectations that were had.
Another interesting team is Spain. I still love the way they play. They're still devoted to that tiki-taka style. So much quality in the midfield. That Gavi is just a wonderful young player, 17 years of age. Unbelievable, the composure he has at that age. But they're not great in either box. I don't think their defenders are that great. They give away some cheap goals. You don't have to create that many chances to score against them. And I don't think they have a great cutting edge up top with guys like Morata and Ferran Torres. So I think they're a team that unfortunately is going to flatter to deceive. They're going to go to the World Cup, play really well, but those deficiencies are going to bite them in a game where they're going to have all the possession and stroke it around beautifully. And we're going to come away feeling like they were the quote unquote better team in that game, but somebody with more of a cutting edge is going to get them in the knockout stage. Do you agree?
Yeah. I mean, when they were great, let's be honest, they were great up top, they were great in the back, and they were maybe the greatest in the midfield when it really came down to it. But I do agree that, they're struggling like a lot of teams and like a lot of the stories that we're talking about, including the US, they're struggling for that person up top that they can go to on a continual basis. And they certainly don't have, the pillars that they have had in the back, with the Ramoses and these types of players that they have had, that they have had over time that dominate. And in those moments when it's not ticky-tacky, are able to clean house and kind of reset for them. They just don't have that.
And then finally, England, as I mentioned, they lose away to Hungary. They're away to Germany tomorrow. We're taping this on a Monday. By the time you listen to this podcast, that game might have already been played. Did you, obviously that's a U.S. opponent in the group stage. Did you take anything away from that Hungary loss, or is it random one-off? What do you think?
Part of me, well, just in general, I take incredible glee whenever England falters. Okay. But part of me was a little bit worried about that. I don't want an England to be wary. I don't want an England to be introspective and to dot all the I's and cross all the T's out there. I want England coming into a World Cup to be as overconfident as possible, because no matter what the U.S., and I'm talking about relative to the U.S., so in the context of the U.S. playing them, the U.S. is going to be looked at as the underdog, a role that I think they're really, really good at playing, and they will be playing that. But I also want England overestimating themselves and underestimating others. And so any type of reminder, and that's really what this was from Hungary, that they are fallible, is I guess I would look at it as a positive for England. So I kind of want them to win and feel good about themselves and come in on a high and then get them. Having said that, if there is an opportunity to see a game plan or a template on how to beat England, and I know it was a penalty and stuff like that, but that's good. Also, from a U.S. perspective and the players to see that they aren't impenetrable, that they aren't a team that is impossible to beat, even for a team like Hungary. That's a good thing. At the end of Star Wars, where they go down and then they see that pathway, that's how they're going to destroy the Death Star. That's good. I'm not sure that was on display in the Hungary-England game, but it's nice to know that they are beatable. I just don't want them to know that they are beatable.
2 more points and then we'll wrap up the segment. Austria won 3-0 away to Croatia, their first game. They did lose to Denmark today, but Ralf Rangnick's smile in the press conference after that 3-0 win over Croatia, I think everybody on Twitter picked up on that. Talk about a guy that feels like he's out of prison now and escaped that toxic atmosphere.
I mean, have you ever seen anybody of the burden lifted off the shoulder anymore? So, I mean, on display, he was very, very happy. I mean, that's how, I guess, depressing and toxic it is to have been the coach and or whatever they called him, consultant for Manchester United in the year 2022.
And then one player taking Nations League very seriously is Erling Haaland. 2 wins out of 2 for Norway. They beat Serbia 1-0. He scored the winner. Then they beat Sweden 2-1. He scored both goals there. And the reason I bring that up is I worry that Erling Haaland could suffer the same fate as somebody like George Best or George Weah, this great player that has a weak supporting cast at the international level. So we never get to see him on the biggest stages, major tournaments, World Cups, etc. So, Norway are in League B, and I'm hoping they get themselves promoted for the next edition of the Nations League, because at the very least in that competition, we'd get to see him play in some big games against top opponents. So I'm keeping an eye on that as well.
Yeah, and just watching him, even, I mean, it makes you sad that he and the team are not going to be at the World Cup. He wouldn't be the first great player not to go to the World Cup just because of where he was born. But man, oh man, does he gobble up space? And just I'm salivating at what it's going to look like at Man City, and it was fun to see. And he just seems to be enjoying it and getting better and better and better. So. Good times ahead. I hope to see him in a World Cup, because it is this strange phenomenon, quirk, if you will, of our game, that you can have these players that the world recognizes as some of the greatest ever to play, and simply because of where they are from, where they are born, and the passport that they have, we don't see them in this great spectacle that is the World Cup, that as a kid they were probably dreaming of the possibility of playing in. Some of them only a dream, because it didn't seem like they could ever do that. But it's a strange thing about our sport, but it's not going to change anytime soon. Maybe it will, though, for Erling Haaland.
That's it.
Okay, we're going to take another quick break. When we come back, it's time for Ask Alexi. Don't go anywhere. Okay, we're back, and it's time for Ask Alexi, that point of the show when you send us your questions. Well, you have sent us your questions, and we pick a few out. You can either send them on Twitter, or you can use our State of the Union podcast hotline, which is 657-549-2297. That's 657-549-2297. I did get a call that I do want to use, but I think I'm going to save it for one for the road. So let's hit a couple of Twitter questions, shall we, Mosse?
Yep. First up, at Sheldon Sieg asks, is this summer transfer window going to be crazy?
I mean, so let's go through some of the things that are either have already happened or are happening right now. You want to go through the list?
I was going to say, not as crazy as it could have been, because the 2 biggest fish, Mbappe and Haaland, resolved their business early. Haaland, as we talked about in the previous segment, went to Manchester City. Mbappe re-signed with PSG. It doesn't sound like Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo is going to go anywhere this summer. So I don't think it'll be that crazy. But what's emerged here is the big transfer saga is Robert Lewandowski trying to force his way out of Bayern to Barcelona. I'm sure some other big players will move as well. So it's always interesting, the transfer window.
It is. And I think it applies not to, you talk about Rudiger to Real Madrid, Isco from leaving Real Madrid. Let's see what else we got here. Pogba, Lingard, Juan Mata. Obviously an exodus when it comes to Manchester United, and rightfully so. Mane and Salah, the rumors of what's going on there. Rafinha to Liverpool, Lacazette leaving Arsenal, Perisic to Tottenham, all those different things. And then you add in, the American players. Christian Pulisic continues to be talked about. Tyler Adams continues to be talked about. We know the move that happened with Brendan Aronson. So these are good things. These are interesting things. And maybe it doesn't always involve the number one players and the elite out there, but there's a lot of movement going on. And these players are going to be in different positions. These teams are going to look different. And keep in mind that because of the World Cup being in November and December, some of these players may be at different places trying to figure out and fit in, and they may look very, very different in terms of, how much they're playing and obviously where they're playing when they get on that plane and go to Doha.
Two things I want to hit you with. First off, Barcelona, it's so confounding to me, this situation. If Barcelona was a serious club, and if European football was at all serious and transparent when it came to money, then Barcelona wouldn't buy a player for the next 3 years. They would just rely on their academy, make the odd free transfer, patch it together, and just accept that they're not going to be able to compete with Real Madrid for the next couple of seasons, that they're going to have to take a step back for the long-term health of the club. And, Messi's departure would make a lot more sense in that context. And that would be a rebuild. We hear that word tossed around a lot in European football, rebuild. That's what an actual rebuild looks like, at least in American sports, where there's a lot more transparency about money. And that if you're successful for a lot of years, those bills are going to come due eventually. I think the fans would have to accept that, because they've given him 15 years of the most incredible football anyone has ever seen. Peak Ronaldinho, peak Messi, all those Champions League titles, La Liga crowns, trebles. And so I think they ought to be able to live with 2 or 3 seasons of not being that good as they sort of get their finances in order. But as we know, you have this super club industrial complex. And so Barcelona spent all of one season, quote unquote, rebuilding. And now they're being linked with every big player in the world this summer. Everyone from Robert Lewandowski to Mo Salah to Rafinha to Bernardo Silva. And meanwhile, parallel to that, you're reading stories about them being bankrupt and not being able to register players. And I'm trying to make sense out of all this. How is this team still trying to operate like a big club and projecting this image that they're out there in the market? They're interested in this one and that one. It doesn't make any sense.
Mosse, why do you care? It's not your money. Who the hell cares? If they want to go spend money that either they have or they don't have, and it's going to make a bigger team and it's going to be more interesting, why does it matter to you?
Well,
This fiscal responsibility that seems to have come over you relative to Barcelona or La Liga or to soccer in general, where does this come from? It's not your job, man. It's okay.
I don't know. I still find it funny. But second thing I want to hit you with is this PSG coaching search. They've hired this guy named Luis Campos to be their sporting director. He's one of the most respected sporting directors in the European game. And this is a move towards trying to be a more quote unquote normal club, because this Luis Campos, he made his name working at places with less resources and adopting more of a Moneyball approach and having this incredible eye for talent. And so he doesn't necessarily fit the PSG mold, but I think they kind of want to shed their superstar approach and try to become a more, like I said, quote unquote, normal club. And so now it sounds like Pochettino is going to be fired and they're going to be in the market for a new coach. The French media is talking up this guy, Christophe Galtier, who won the title with Lille a couple of seasons ago, spent last season with Nice. And he, again, not a sexy choice, but would be along those lines, a good, solid coach who would come in and no thrills and just kind of come in and do a proper job. But the English media couldn't resist kind of interjecting into the story. And an English newspaper reported it, that they were actually considering Jose Mourinho. And so for a couple of days, that had Twitter in a tizzy, and everybody was trying to imagine what that would look like. Jose Mourinho managing PSG with Neymar, Messi, and Mbappe. Doesn't sound like there's anything to it, but let's pretend for a second there was. I mean, what on earth do you think that would look like?
I love it. how do I will this to happen? Yeah, I love it. I think it would be incredible. I think it would be, obviously, from Jose's perspective, a return to the top, if you will. Yeah, I mean, again, you're kind of complaining about these big super clubs not acting like super clubs. And so whether it's the fiscal responsibility or a long-term type of approach or an unknown type of coach, yeah, that's not what I want from my super clubs. And part of what makes super clubs to me special is that beautiful arrogance, is that ability to say, no, we're going to double down. It's because that's who we are. That ultimately is what our identity is. So yeah, I mean, that would, because, we've talked about the possibility of PSG saying, well, this was an interesting project. We didn't get to the top of the mountain. We got pretty close, but maybe we should have bought in the EPL, or maybe we should do something different, or maybe we should look elsewhere. I hope they don't give up on that, on getting to the top of the mountain. Because the more super clubbish type of things that we have, the better I think it is. And I really kind of enjoy them because, again, it's not my money. So I would love to see Jose Mourinho there. I'm not sure, because it kind of came and it burned, hot and high, and then it's kind of gone quiet here. And by all accounts, I mean, Jose's done well at Roma. He's liked at Roma. He seems to like Rome. So he's in a good place right now, but it's Jose. I mean, that smell, that lure of something like that, even if there's just a scent wafting through Rome, he's going to be like a dog or a cat that smells it and just boom, on point, saying, "Oh, interesting." So I don't know, but is it just all smoke, or is there fire there?
I said the French media, which I assume is more plugged in with PSG, is talking up this Christophe Galtier. So I don't think it's going to be
boring. How do you say boring in French, Mosse? Jeez.
Next up, at Plasma Etching asks, what is your opinion about Neymar? Is the criticism he receives exaggerated? I'm going to let you answer that. I have a couple of Neymar statistical things I want to bring up, but this is more a question for you.
Yeah. So, and just so, is the general criticism of Neymar exaggerated? Only in that he's one of the most famous people in the world. And so it's not it is exaggerated because he is a star of the world. And therefore, every little thing that he does, whether it matters or not, and in many cases it doesn't matter, is going to be nitpicked and picked apart when it comes to the world, on people that have an opinion about everything, people that don't have an opinion, and it's because it's Neymar, on people that are knowledgeable and therefore have knowledge behind their opinions or not. So no, I think it is exaggerated because of the stature of this player. Now, the other day, Neymar came into some, should we say criticism or not? But, what Neymar does on the field and with the rolling around, I think he's that's forever going to be part of the criticism of him. But I do think that he has matured and kind of moved on from that. He has, to a certain extent, stopped in that he's never going to be the number one in the world. He's never going to be Messi, and he's never going to be Cristiano Ronaldo. And he was kind of talked up to possibly be that. And that's okay. He's still going to be an incredible player. And he's still going to come into criticism, but he's still a player that I want on my team. He recently mocked Argentina's.
Well, now let me address that first.
Okay, you want to address
that story was very misreported and stripped of any context. So, when Argentina, after they won the Finalissima, they went back into the locker room and they started chanting about Brazil, taking shots at Brazil, singing songs against Brazil. Otamendi recorded it and posted it on social media. The Brazilian media picked up on it and it became a big story. And so Neymar was reacting to that. And so he took a shot at Argentina. But the way it was reported was as if it was this totally unprovoked thing where he just saw Argentina celebrating the fact that they won the Finalissima and and said, "Oh, did they win the World Cup?" So the context there was it was him replying back to an Argentine provocation. I will say the Brazil-Argentina thing is red hot right now. Argentina is having a moment. They're really feeling themselves. They have a big complex about Brazil, and so they're really kind of reveling in this moment they're having and taking all sorts of shots at Brazil. And it's funny because there's also this Europe versus South America thing going on that was ignited by Mbappe, and Brazil and Argentina are on the same side there, and we're kind of bigging up each other and responding to Mbappe and saying, "No, what are you talking about?" The Argentinian players were saying us and Brazil would clean up in Europe, and Brazilians were saying us and Argentina would clean up in Europe. So in that case, they're on the same side. But then parallel to that, they also are feuding with each other. So it makes for a delicious cocktail entering this World Cup.
Well, the reason why Brazil was brought into the celebration is because what is the Finalissima, right? It is the champions of CONMEBOL versus the champions of UEFA. How did Argentina get to be the champions? Remind the folks out there how Argentina came to be the champions of CONMEBOL.
By winning the Copa America, beating Brazil on Fox last year.
Yeah, it was on Fox. And where was the game? Remind me again where the game was.
Maracanã.
That would be in Brazil?
Yep.
So Messi and company not only won Copa America, but they went into Brazil and won it in Brazil against Neymar and his Brazil, which enabled them to go and then kick the crap out of Italy in the Finalissima. So I think
this Finalissima that only seems to occur after Argentina wins the Copa America. Brazil also won a Copa America in this cycle. Where was our Finalissima match? But nevertheless,
look, we talked about the relative ridiculousness of celebrating with a trophy off of one single game. And we see this in England before the seasons and that kind of stuff. I don't think that Neymar, he knew exactly what he was doing when he pressed send on that Instagram post. So it's fine. But I do think it is justified. Oftentimes the criticism that Neymar comes in for, not all of it, but I think it's justified. But oftentimes even when it's justified, it doesn't mean that I agree with it.
On Neymar, Brazil played 2 friendlies in this window against South Korea and Japan. And he scored 3 goals in those 2 games, all from the penalty spot. He's scoring all his goals for Brazil from the penalty spot these days. Lucky for him, no country gets awarded more dodgy penalties than Brazil. So he's now up to 74. The Brazil record is 77 by Pele. So he's on the verge. He's probably going to break that soon, perhaps even on our air during the World Cup. Ooh. Now, because nothing can ever be simple with Pele and goal scoring tallies. The FIFA number for Pele is 77. They only count games against other national teams, which is what I go by as well. But Brazil back in the day used to play a lot of friendlies against club teams. When they were preparing for these tournaments, they thought it was useful to play against a club team. And Pele scored a lot of goals in those games. And the Brazilian Federation counts those. So they have Pele with 95. Yeah, they have Pele with 95. They don't think Neymar's even close. And a lot of Brazilian media go with that number. And so we're going to have this farcical scenario where when he gets to 78, the rest of the world is going to be touting the fact that he surpassed Pele, except his own country. There's going to be some stupid argument about it. I will say, though, Pele, after decades of being boorish and petty and insecure, he's actually become much more gracious the last couple of years. As Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo have broken his records, he sent them very nice messages on Instagram congratulating them. And he loves Neymar. So I suspect he'll do the same. He's not going to fight that battle. He'll acknowledge Neymar surpassing him. So it's going to make anybody who is fighting that battle look silly if the person whose record was broken is willing to acknowledge it. So, but nevertheless,
that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. What? So a game that doesn't count as an international appearance and cap, but they count
it as a cap too. So
it's not the definition of a cap. How the hell can you count it as a cap? That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen.
No, I agree. I go with the FIFA number. It's 77. They have FIFA have him with 77 and 91 games, which by the way is some ratio. Brazil have him with 95 and 114 if you total up all those games. But you know what's interesting? There's a larger point I want to make here. Once Neymar surpasses Pele, Italy will be the only big nation whose all-time leading scorer will be an old-time player. It's still Luigi Riva, this striker from the 60s and 70s who played in Cagliari for most of his career, who has 35 goals and remains Italy's all-time leading scorer. That's a relatively paltry number to be your country's all-time leading scorer. It is 35 in 42 games. Excellent ratio. He was a great striker. But every other top country you look at, that record's been broken within the last decade or so. Brazil, it's going to be Neymar. Argentina, it's Messi. Uruguay, it's Suarez. Chile, it's Alexis Sanchez. Colombia, it's Radamel Falcao. Germany, it's Miroslav Klose. France, it's Thierry Henry. England, it's Wayne Rooney. The Netherlands, it's Robin van Persie. Spain, it's David Villa. Portugal, Cristiano Ronaldo. So it's kind of interesting that, it speaks to what we were talking about earlier, more games against minnows, that all these records now are being broken by more contemporary players, except for Italy for whatever reason. And there's no guy coming up that's even close. Yeah. So Luigi Riva is going to have that record for a long time.
Huh. Yeah. I mean, to your point, the amount of games that they play. So, I mean, that doesn't necessarily surprise me. And, Italy, I mean, when was the last true goal scorer? Like Totti? I mean, so they don't have one. They don't have one. I just still can't believe that your Brazil Federation is counting games against club teams. I mean, with the US team, I remember playing Bayern Munich and stuff. So it never even occurred to me that would count as a cap or that a goal scored would count as an international goal. That's ridiculous. All right. I can't believe it. I need to call somebody or send a letter. All
right.
What else we got?
So last thing, and this requires a little context. So Catarina Macario just got hurt. I wanted to discuss that. We didn't get a question specifically about her injury. We got a question about her before she got hurt. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to read that question, but then we're going to go into talking about, unfortunately, her injury. At Hank Meyer asks, are you as excited as I am about Macario? If she comes to the NWSL, how inevitable is it that she'll end up in Seattle? As a Thorns fan and father of a 14-year-old super fan, should I hold my breath? Well, that was before the news. Catarina Macario suffered a torn ACL. She's going to be out several months. She's going to miss the Women's CONCACAF Championship this summer, which functions as qualifying for both the Women's World Cup and the next Olympics. And we talked about the U.S. going through this rejuvenation and Vlad Kondonovsky casting aside a lot of the hallowed veterans and building the attack around Macario and Mallory Pugh and Sophia Smith. And Macario is really the standard bearer of this new generation. I mean, she's somebody that people think very soon was going to be the best player in the world. And for her to pick up this injury, it's a shame, slows her momentum. It affects the team. And what do you make of it?
I feel so bad. The bad news, obviously, this is not only it's a bad injury for any player, but this was the future, and I still think is the future. I think she'll be okay in terms of the time. Obviously, the qualifying for the World Cup. Let's be honest, the U.S. women are going to qualify for the World Cup unless something goes drastically wrong with or without Macario. I think that is inevitable, and it has been pretty much every single time. But this was the heir apparent. And, you're still going to come back from a very serious injury, and we don't know what you're going to look like. As far as her coming back to the U.S., why would she come back? I think, she's winning. She's doing well. I mean, she seems to be making money and enjoying what is going on. Unless that changes off the field. She's coming off winning a Champions League, scoring in the Champions League final, all those different things. She seems to have carved out a life on and off the field in Europe. That's not to say that there isn't going to be a pull back to the United States. And if and when she comes back, yeah, I could certainly see her coming to Seattle, but there will be others. As far as what this means for the U.S. women's national team, I think that, to your point, Mosse, that train had moved on, and Vlatko Andonovski, I think, had been very, very clear that he needed to try some different things, and a lot of it was built around Macario. Alex Morgan is still going to be in the mix, but this is going to make it very, very interesting in terms of the timing as to when she gets back. And I would think by the time she gets back, the U.S. will have qualified for the World Cup, and she'll still be in the mix. But this will set her back. But she's a player that I want on the field. I think she's a player that's going to score a lot of goals going forward for the U.S. and for whatever club team she ultimately plays for. And she's a player that I think is going to be looked at as that player that took it from this past generation that was so successful to that next generation. And that World Cup's going to come sooner rather than later. And maybe if she recovers well, and she should, this could be her breakout type of moment. And from a World Cup perspective, and for the women, that's really where oftentimes they are measured, is in the World Cup. Anything else, Mosse?
That is it.
All right. Well, thank you for your questions. We're going to take another quick break here and come back to the end of our show and one for the road, which does actually involve someone who called us up and left us a message on the hotline. So don't go anywhere. All right, we're back. And each and every week I ask you about to call in on the hotline, and we get calls. Some of them we can use, some of them we can't. But there was a call that we got this week that referenced something that you and I talked about, Mosse, which was I had asked the question out loud about. We were talking about youth development, and obviously that is a huge subject when it comes to soccer and all sports out there. And we were talking about baseball and kind of the lack of phenoms that exist relative to soccer in what we were talking about. And I asked the question, and because I didn't have the answer, and I assumed that our incredibly good-looking and intelligent audience out there, somewhere out there would be people that knew a whole lot more than we did. And I was absolutely right. Let's see. Joe from Madison, Ohio, said this in answer to our question about the development of baseball and the development of young players in baseball. Let's hear what Joe has to say.
Hey guys, it's Joe from Madison, Ohio. I just wanted to weigh in on the MLB Phenom talk from Monday's episode of the podcast. I think some of it is going to have to do with the fact that baseball is just not as popular in the country. So when you have these young stars, you just don't see them marketed the same as in the more popular sports. But also, MLB has an interesting rule about the age of which an American-born player can play in the major leagues versus a foreign-born player. And I believe that age is 18 for American, 16 for foreign. So I think that's another reason you're going to see less of these younger phenoms just because of the age. Lastly on that, I would think that some of it may have to do with how long an MLB season is, 162 games. That's very grueling. So I think there has to be a maturity aspect with these young guys, or with these Major League Baseball players being on the road that long, and just, dealing with all the ups and the downs, the back-to-back-to-back games, things like that. So I think that's why, you're going to see baseball players at a little higher age when they're finally breaking through. Thanks, guys.
So there's Joe over there in Madison, Ohio, talking about the differences and what he feels are the reasons why we don't necessarily see the phenoms in baseball in the way that we do at other sports, including soccer. And it was interesting to hear him talk about, obviously, the length of the season and the difference in age groups and what you're able to do at 18 relative to 16 and that kind of stuff. And then, he mentioned that it's not as popular. I mean, baseball folks will probably push back a little bit on that, but I get what he's saying. It's certainly relative to football and basketball to a certain extent out there. So I get it. And I do think that soccer in general lends itself to being younger, as does obviously tennis and those other sports. And I think that, baseball, while it is a physical endeavor, there's so much more that goes into it in terms of, the mental part of the game, that it might just take a little longer for the development of both the body and the brain to get to the level that enables you to compete at the elite level, as opposed to soccer, where, yes, there is a mental aspect to it, but, the physical part of it, you can very, very quickly at least get to that plane. And then if you're good technically and all those other different ways, you can compete at a relatively young age. And so maybe it just lends itself much more in soccer to having these young phenoms. The marketing part of it, I think, look, we are from a sport that marketed Freddie Adu. And you can look at, the good and bad of that. But, from the moment that Freddie Adu burst on the scene, everybody knew who he was, whether you were a soccer fan or not. And, we've continued to do that, I guess to a certain extent. And certainly this national team right now is made up of a generation that, while they weren't the Freddie Adu phenoms, Christian Pulisic came about. A lot of them have come about as teenagers, and some of them are playing as teenagers. And again, Bruce Arena famously said that, especially when it comes to the international game, it is a young man's game. It's a young woman's game. It's a young person's game. And he's absolutely right. And so there is maybe just a greater acceptance and therefore more opportunity for younger people to be involved at a higher level than in other sports. So I appreciate Joe, though, listening to the show and taking the time to at least throw out some ideas. There may be other of you out there that have some other reasons or just want to expound upon this subject that we're talking about here. And if you want to leave us a message, feel free to do so. Now you will see and or hear that Mosse is nowhere to be found. During Joe's message, Mosse just up and left. He had somewhere to go, evidently, he told us. And, Mosse is mysterious, to say the least. So I don't know where it is he's going, but I would think, even though he didn't tell me, that he would want me to say, please excuse me, apologies, but he had to duck out early, and he would want to say thank you for listening. I will say, since he's not here, if you get a chance, pull up Fox Bet and pull up Mosse, who appeared on Fox Bet. I don't know. Hey, Luis, come online here for a second, will you? Because since Mosse's not here, you can come on. There's the great Luis for folks to see. Now that Mosse's not here, tell the folks about what Mosse did, because we were so excited and proud of what our friend David Mosse did this past week.
Mosse appeared on an episode of Fox Bet Live with Doug McIntyre and Jason McIntyre to preview the UEFA Nations League and then look forward to the World Cup, give us predictions. And Conrad, the producer of the show, was so happy with Mosse's performance there. Just incredible reviews. He wants him back immediately.
Well, I mean, I think the people that saw that, and if you hadn't, seek it out, and we'll retweet it and get it out there for folks. But if you got a chance, check it out, because as Mosse has come into this space of being on air and doing the things that we do here, he has just grown by leaps and bounds. And it's not a surprise that the producer of that show or any show that Mosse goes on would be floored and would want him back because of the quality that he brings. So we're proud of our friend David Mosse for his appearance there. It's probably not going to be the last time. And if I have, if I have any say, not that I do, it won't be the last time, especially as we get closer and closer to the World Cup. Luis, thank you for everything that you do. Mosse, even though you're not here, thank you for everything that you do. But most importantly, thank you to everybody for downloading and reviewing and rating and doing all the different things that you do when it comes to the State of the Union podcast. We will be back again next week. All sorts of soccer happening this week, including international games, the return of Major League Soccer at some point here in the future, leading up to the end of the year. And we'll be talking about all of these different things, especially as it relates to that World Cup coming in November and December that you can see on Fox. It's going to be a real fun summer. And then obviously a wonderful run up in the fall leading up to that World Cup. Nations League continues on. Check that out going forward. And like I said, we'll see you again next week. And until then, and as always, size the day. You like that clip? Well, my State of the Union podcast drops every week. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.